keynote tomorrow, which he still will from Washington, DC, but had to cancel his travel yesterday. I mean, he forewarned me last week, he thought it was likely, but he was trying. He cancelled, and so Jana Bennett very kindly stepped in at about 24 hours notice to be a panelist. And then on the excellent advice of people here present at the conference about the wisdom in having a speaker from the Muslim chaplaincy community here on our panel, and we were also able, at 24 seconds notice, minus 24 seconds notice, Ustadha Ameena Blake, who was my close colleague, so I knew that she couldn't say no, also here on the panel. Ameena gets to go last, okay? Then you know what he wants to say. And everybody will be introduced in a minute. Now, the thing about me and Lord Parekh was I wrote to him 5 weeks ago and I said, Lord Parekh, when you came to York St John, where I used to be a university chaplain, you changed my whole working life about interfaith. So I really hope you will come and be the chair here to be of influence and say some of the things you said before, or some new things. And he said, well, I don't know what I said when I came to change your working life. What did I say? I said, well, I repeat it once a week, normally in my working career. So this is what I remember. Did I get it wrong? So I wrote him a paragraph. He said, yes, that's what I said. So when he called me this morning and he said, I'm feeling unwell and I'm going to need to test as well for COVID, and I definitely have been told by my doctor there's no possibility of travel, I said, will you give me permission to say what you said? He said, of course I would be delighted. So since that was just before I stepped into a 9-seater to go to a park, I didn't feel like volunteering anybody else until I was told to volunteer you. I mean, it wasn't my idea. I'll tell you who volunteered you a bit later. Anyway, so I thought I will try and say very little, except to repeat Bhikhu Parekh's words, Lord Parekh's words, and then I knew what would wind up for the panel, so we'll get on with the panel, and I will try not to say very much, okay, at all. But the opening remarks will be his, with me closing them. So, do you think you would have got you to introduce yourselves first and then make the opening remarks? I think so. And I think you will. Are you all happy to introduce yourselves? Does that sound all right? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm Anthony Reddie. As you were there this morning, I'm born and brought up in Yorkshire. I live in Birmingham, work in Oxford, and I'm a Bachelor of Theology.
My name is Sophie Dunoff. I'm the CEO of University Jewish Chaplaincy.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristin Aune. I'm Professor of Sociology of Religion at Coventry University, but I live in Manchester.
Hi, I'm Jana Bennett. I'm a Professor of Religious Studies and Department Chair at the University of Dayton.
Hi, I'm Ustadha Ameena Blake. I am the Muslim chaplain in Sheffield and I am from Sheffield. I'm also a university lecturer as well.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for joining the panel. If Bhikhu Parekh had been here, he would have said, I want to remind you that there are 3 really bad reasons for interfaith that we use all the time. And I can't really do it in his voice anymore, but I listened to this lecture for 45 minutes and I didn't know he was going to give us a good reason for it at the end. And I sat there as my world fell apart. I thought, oh, there are all my reasons. So, but still, I convey them from him to you. So the first thing he said is the first bad reason we use for interfaith is, let's do dialogue to get to know each other better. He said, now that's a really bad reason, because you can get to know each other better to kill each other better too. And he said, I'm from the former India, before it was divided. That was when I was born in the he's 86 now, so anyway, how long ago? And he said, you need to know why you're getting to know each other better. You can't just say it's a good enough reason to get to know each other better. Bad reason number 1. Bad reason number 2, let's solve a common problem together. He said, well, how's that going to work? Are you going to try and solve HIV/AIDS in Africa without talking about your differences? Because if you start on a mission to solve something, whether it's hunger or birth control or HIV/AIDS, soon enough you will find there are difficulties between you that you had never addressed in the first place. Bad reason number 2. Bad reason number 3, he said, and he speaks as a secular Hindu, in British society, and is the author of The Future of Multi-Ethnic Britain, which was a formal report from a panel that he chaired. He said the third bad reason is to mass together as religion and belief people to fight the common enemy being the secular or anybody out there who isn't religious. He said, when you do that, you marginalise yourselves further still than if you were trying to enter into dialogue with those who are other to you, including those who are not the religious. So at 45 minutes into the lecture, I thought, yeah, those are the kinds of reasons I've used for the last 15 years. He said, this is what you might want to do before you attempt to do any of the other things. Do this thing first. Go back into your own tradition and go back to yourself and go deep within and then start to ask, what's the real reason that I wish to do dialogue and interfaith and speaking between different belief and religious communities? Find out what it is. Be really honest with yourself. Then talk to your own community and test out your meaning and your motivation, and if it's a theology, test it out. And then when you start to do dialogue, interfaith, whatever you want to call it, interreligious conversation, religion and belief conversation, tell the others why you're in the room. And then maybe you will actually have a better opportunity to work together. So this is what Bhikhu would have been saying in Lord Parekh tonight. And I hope that that might be of some use, and some of that is in articles that he's written, and you can look him up, and he just profusely apologises for the short notice cancellation. The format for the panel tonight is that each speaker has been invited to take a circumstance they know of themselves or have been directly involved in, where there was an issue around anti-hate or anti-racism or anti-violence that turned out in some way for the better, or had some kind of advantage that arose from maybe a difficult situation. And each speaker was given an absolute maximum of 4 minutes, just like those speakers, the Lord Mayor and the Deputy Lieutenant on Monday, who I really liked that the Deputy Lieutenant said, and that's the end of my 3-minute speech, having been speaking for 11 minutes. So over to all of you, I do not mind if you run over your time. We're just so looking forward to hearing you, and I'm going to stay silent. Do the 5 of you have any preference on order, or are we just going to go along? Okay. Okay, thank you, Anthony. Any volunteers?
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to talk about an experience that I have had at Coventry University in developing a research and intervention project to deal with religion and belief-related harassment on campus. So we ran a 2-year project funded by the Office for Students in their programme of work to tackle religion-based hate crime. So we produced guidance which we shared nationally. Some people may have seen this. It's available to download. I've also got loads of copies, but not with me because I couldn't carry them all. So, but I can get 1 or 2 or 3 or however many posted to you if you would like. So we partnered with IACHE and the Church of England Education Office. And a large part of that was about ensuring that the university's harassment reporting system worked well for religion or belief. And we did research to assess the impact of that work. So we began the project with a survey to discover students' attitudes to and experiences of religion or belief-related harassment. About 600 students responded. There was quite a good awareness of religion-related hate incidents, so over 2/3 thought that they would be able to identify one if they encountered one. Most thought of the university as a place where people of different backgrounds got on well. However, echoing an NUS survey, we found that fear of harassment was an issue for 1/4 of our students. And 6% of students who completed the survey said they had experienced a religion or belief-related hate incident since coming to university, and that's similar to other studies. Now, the incidents were mostly verbal abuse. Students often felt targeted because of their ethnicity as well as their religion or their perceived religion. The perpetrators were mostly white males, strangers or another student, and most students had not reported the incident. Students from minority religious groups were more likely to say they'd experienced a hate incident. So how can we help students be and feel safe? Well, one thing is to have a reporting system and show that the university will support them if something happens to them and they're victimised. So what did we do at Coventry? Well, we already had Office for Students funding to establish harassment reporting that had happened a few years ago around sexual harassment particularly. So there was already an online reporting system. So we set up a religion working group, including academics, the SU staff, SU sabbaticals, the Muslim chaplain, and a harassment case manager. And we then adapted the reporting system so that it worked well for religion. We employed a part-time harassment case manager who was a specialist in religion. And they adapted our referral pathways document, so if a student comes and says, scenario X has happened to them, we know where to send them. So for example, we would signpost them often to chaplaincy, but also to external organisations such as Tell Mama, who deal with anti-Muslim hate, and Community Security Trust, who deal with anti-Semitism. So we then advertised harassment reporting via posters and screens in buildings, etc. We ran events including talks in Induction and Welcome Week, Hate Crime Awareness Week, Interfaith Week, and then we did a final survey to evaluate the impact of the project. And we found, for example, that the poster campaign had been successful in raising awareness of harassment reporting, so students now knew where they could go. But there was one seemingly negative finding, and that was to do with fear. So a higher percentage of students said at the end of the project that they were fearful of harassment happening to them. So Black, Asian and minority ethnic, female and Muslim students particularly were fearful. So what we learned from that really is that putting in place systems for reporting won't necessarily decrease fear, but it may be a small price to pay for helping students feel supported that if something does happen to them, there is somewhere that they can go. And then just to finish, we asked students' views on how harassment can be tackled in other ways than just reporting, and they had loads of suggestions, including working with the chaplaincy, interfaith work with academics in classes and SUs, and I think like asking the students is always really, really important, so I'll end on that. Thank you.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and an honour to be sitting on this panel with my esteemed colleagues. Before being able to address peaceful campus dialogue, I thought it might be helpful to contextualise the racism Jewish students can face on campus in order to be able to speak about some of the positive dialogue, synergies and initiatives that exist to help combat and educate against these harms on campus. This is particularly important given the currently historically high levels of anti-Semitism in the UK. A 2020 report by the Community Security Trust on anti-Semitism in higher education highlighted Jewish students' experiences of harassment, threatening behaviour and assault. Unfortunately, we also see spikes in anti-Semitism within the higher education sphere when there is political unrest in the Middle East. In 2021, there were 128 recorded anti-Semitic incidents in which the victims or offenders were students or academics. These were obviously troubling and disconcerting stats, which can and do lead to Jewish students feeling unsafe on campus. The question for us at University Jewish Chaplaincy is what can we do to preemptively and proactively create more peaceful dialogues on campus, safe spaces for students and staff to build better understanding and acceptance. I'd like to look at a few examples of instances where early intervention and dialogue have helped mitigate situations which could have easily deteriorated. Not so long ago, a theology department in a well-known university in the UK reached out to ask for advice and assistance with a troubling issue of alleged anti-Semitism. In parallel, the student had also reached out to us for support. Indeed, the reports were troubling and it seemed plausible that students were facing anti-Semitism unchecked by the lecturers. Theology not actually being my area of expertise, I quickly brought in Rabbi Belofsky, who is our rabbinic head, and who you will have already heard at conference already. Rabbi Belofsky explored the issue in depth with the department, so there were a number of in-depth meetings, conversations to understand what had been going on. And what transpired really was interesting. By the department's own admission, the course seemed to have attracted a specific group of Christians from a particular Christian background who had been surprised to find themselves on a course learning in depth about other religions and indeed varying denominations within their own religion. These students, not familiar with being challenged by other faith narratives and somewhat committed to evangelism, were using that space in the classroom to further their own worldview and pushing that perhaps onto their classmates. We quickly understood that this wasn't about anti-Semitism or the targeting of any one student, rather mismanaged expectations of the students who had signed up to the course and a lack of perhaps of understanding around Judaism and theology. We found that the staff at this university were considered and sensitive to the issues at hand. We appreciated them bringing us in to this situation to help foster some better understanding and better relations between the students. Rabbi Belofsky was actually invited to give a lecture on Judaism to the cohort, which really facilitated a space where students could ask difficult questions and constructive conversation ensued. This is a perfect example of catching a spark before it turns into a fire. Hearing both sides and working towards better understanding with all those involved, the outcome here was a positive one. Speaking in more general terms, and I realise I'm probably a bit short on time now, there's various initiatives that run across the UK which really enhance peaceful campus dialogues, regular interfaith events, inviting other faiths into our religious and social spaces. We regularly encourage our Jewish students to create better understanding with their classmates and their course mates on campus. We have Friday night dinners where the Jewish students invite their non-Jewish friends to attend a Friday night dinner, and we find that it is generally very hard to fall out over a bowl of chicken soup. Other examples are in Oxford. Our Jewish chaplains, together with their other multi-faith colleagues, organised a multi-faith blood drive where there was also an opportunity for the different faiths to talk about their approaches to medical ethics. I could list many more initiatives like these, all of which do so much to help model positive and peaceful dialogues on campus. While we continue to educate and create safe spaces for those of all faiths and none to come together over non-contentious and social experiences, we help build firmer bridges so that when there are sparks of conflict, there is already a foundation of understanding and commonality in place.
For my case, the example I want to give literally only finished this Monday, just gone. So the centre I direct was originally called the Oxford Centre for Christianity and Culture, and was started in 1994, and I'm the third director. I was appointed in 2019, started in 2020. And part of my appointment, they had already made the decision to change it from a centre of Christianity and culture to a centre of religion and culture. And one of the things I wanted to do was to ensure that our college was not just a cosy, white, Anglo-Saxon Christian club, which is largely what it has been for a long time. I'm the first black person they've employed who has not been a cook or a cleaner or a domestic. As I often remind them, when the college was being created and the wider university, no one had someone like me in mind who might end up working there. So what we proposed, and I owe a huge amount to Kirstin's colleague, that is Professor Paul Weller. And Paul Weller is a well-known expert, intellectual academic in terms of interfaith, and he is my associate director. And so we came up with a program called Interreligious and Interconvictional Dialogue. And so we've had 4 speakers, followed by a very, very intense final plenary that happened on Monday just gone. That's why I was not here on the first day. That's why I was travelling up on the train when I was apparently also in dialogue with my friend from Ameena. Our first speaker was also an academic from Coventry, Soraya, and she spoke about Muslims in dialogue. She is a feminist Muslim sociologist, and she spoke from her perspective about various bits of work she had done. And then what she did, I think, was to complicate how we perceive what is a Muslim. So she said, I'm a post-colonial feminist Muslim. Our second speaker was a humanist, whose first question was, well, of course, I feel odd being here at a conversation about faith, because by definition as a humanist, I don't have a religious faith. But it is a position that we need to take seriously, and he again spoke about humanists. And that's what's important, he said, I'm a humanist, I'm not an atheist. The atheism is a reaction against something else. I am a positive person who believes that humanity can have values without necessarily being linked to a form of religious identity. Our third speaker was a Christian, and he spoke about Christians and dialogue. And he came from a very liberal position, which was probably more challenging to the other Christians in the room than it was to people from other religious traditions. Certainly an evangelical friend of mine said, I can't spot the difference between him and the humanist who spoke the week before. And our final speaker was a progressive woman rabbi. And she came and she again gave her particular take on Judaism. And then on Monday just gone, we had all 4 together, and each would interrogate each other, so they all shared their papers ahead of time. And we had a really cramped afternoon, so we started at 12:30, finished at 6 o'clock, with only a half an hour break between, I mean, I looked at Paul, my colleague, and I said, Paul, are you crazy? I mean, seriously, only a 30-minute break across like a 3 hours. And he said, yeah, but we want to get it all in. So we got it all in, but we were pretty weary at the end. And I guess the greatest learning that came out of that is how complex individuals are, and how complex, therefore, how we negotiate space within our different traditions. What has often tended to happen when we think about our interfaith dialogue is that we either try to find lazy consensus, or sometimes what we do is that we find people who are representative of their reflected traditions, and of course who defines what is representative anyway. And they speak from a position sometimes of authority, so it tends to be leaders. There was no one of these 4 speakers who were official spokesperson for their tradition. Well, actually, that's not quite strictly true. Actually, so Rabbi Jackie Cabot is a rabbi, and she does have a congregation in North London. But for the most part, I don't think any of them would have been representative of their particular tradition. It was rigorous conversation, but it was always done on the basis of seeking, as I said this morning, seeking elucidation. So when you ask a question, you're asking a genuine question in order to know more. We encourage people to use the I word. So rather than talk about, well, Christians say, no, what do you say if you self-identify as a Christian? It certainly, I think the biggest impact has been on our college. So we are a Baptist foundation. We are founded by dissenting Christians at a time when, if you are not Anglican, you are not allowed to go to university, so you're not allowed to go to Oxford University. That test act was only passed in 1871. There's one point, certainly at the final meal, where we had 26 people around the table from a variety of religious traditions. And I remember sitting there and looking at the wall of all these dead white men who founded the college. And I mused to myself thinking, I bet none of you guys ever thought that this number of people would be sat around the room in this college as equals, discussing matters of deep concern, but doing so that furthermost at the heart of it is our common humanity as individuals. That has been the single best thing I've done since I started. And my final thing to say is that if you want to see all of those proceedings, probably except the one that happened on Monday, it's not put up yet, that we have a YouTube page. So the Oxford Centre for Religion and Culture YouTube page, all of those dialogues are, all of them have been recorded and you can watch all of them, and the final conversation will be up sometime early next week.
Okay, so a thing I forgot to say in the introduction, my own introduction of myself, is that the University of Dayton is a Catholic and Marianist school in Dayton, Ohio, in the United States. And when Jeremy asked if I would do this 24 hours ago, I was trying to think of what to say, and so I think the story I want to tell is one about my community of Dayton, because they are the people who are, I am very peripheral, I feel like, in the story that I want to tell, but I want to tell the story about some of the work that I think is being done in Dayton related to anti-racism and anti-hate. And it starts with an interfaith group that was pretty much exactly like the one that Jeremy mentioned initially. It was a group that came together as a good interfaith group with the purpose of trying to convince one of the suburbs in the city to extend the bus line because it had a shopping mall, and the city had recently voted that it didn't want to extend the bus line. It had stated reasons that had nothing to do with race or economics, but I think when you actually looked at the map of where the city was and where Dayton is, you could pretty much tell that what they wanted to do was not allow certain people, especially the black people in the city, to go into this largely white area. And it was a problem in multiple ways, not just because it was racist, that was the key problem, but people in the city of Dayton worked there, so they couldn't get to their jobs on time if they didn't have the bus line. So this interfaith group, of which I was a part when I first moved to Dayton, worked for a year on this, finally convinced the city to extend the bus line, and everybody was sort of patting themselves on the back in a certain kind of way. But then people started having a longer conversation, which was, there's a lot that is wrong here, and it's not about bus lines, it's about other things. And we really need to do a much deeper dive about this. And the thing about the city of Dayton is that it's a very segregated city. It is not in the American South, which is where everybody thinks of in terms of segregation. It is in the north. It's on the Underground Railroad, so there are multiple places where you can go and see the places where people would hide slaves who were trying to escape to freedom in Canada. but at the same time, it is a city that has a history of racism. And one of the ways that that happened was that in the 1930s, there was a very strong program of preventing, especially Black people, but also immigrants to the city, from getting mortgages so they could buy housing. And what that has done over a series of generations is created pockets of great poverty and great segregation in the city. And you can see exactly where these lines are still today, nearly 100 years later, because those are the places in the city where there are no grocery stores and there are no places where people have fresh food. So what does this have to do with this interfaith group? Well, I think what happened is all of the people in that group went back to their communities and thought, how can we begin as a city, but also as people of faith to go on from here. And so Maha Salasi is one of the people who pastor of a Baptist church on the west side of Dayton, who said, we're going to have a co-op grocery store. And he spent several years, and finally last year, it just had its 1 year anniversary last year, we opened that grocery store. All of us together were celebrating it. And so it's been this great thing of celebration and momentum in the city. But at the same time, other religious groups were doing some of their own things. And what was happening at the University of Dayton on the basis of Catholic social teaching, specifically that racism is a grave evil, was to move part of its campus downtown to be specifically not part of white Dayton, but specifically to be into the different part of the city. And there's now a free bus that goes back and forth between that part. And I and many other people teach classes down there, and part of it has been also around this question of how do we think about getting rid of this food desert. So there's some people, some Marianists, who created an urban farm in a broken down swimming pool where there were drug dealers, and instead filled in the swimming pool, and now you can either subscribe if you have money to get food, or you can get free food, depending, and there's cooking classes and that kind of thing, and that was all founded by a Marianist lay group. And so different people are doing different things. Somebody else created a mobile food truck to go around the city. And I guess that's just to say, each one of us, I think we're coming from our own tradition and trying to come up with particular things, complex things, the things we could do, and I think all together, I'm afraid that in telling the story, I'm shorthanding it too much because it's been a long time and a lot of years. But I think it's important to celebrate people like Maha Salasi and Kelly Johnson and Kiara, who are doing this work all over the city. I've been really privileged just to be on the edge of it with my students and supporting the grocery store with my money and that kind of thing. But I think there are some beautiful things that happen when you start networking and having conversations, but also you reach deep into your own tradition. So I'll end there.
Just move around so you can all see me. Hate takes many forms, and harassment and takes many forms, both macro and micro. Sometimes things are socially accepted, sometimes things are not socially accepted, but it doesn't make any type of hate okay. Female Muslims, niqab wearers, cover their face especially. The media often presents the female Muslim as the oppressed victim of the Muslim male, unable to think for herself, and for the convert Muslim woman, it's even worse because we innocently flounder into becoming Muslim. And as a result, society becomes compelled to guide us to freedom through ongoing imperialist creative ideas of superior and feminist and Western values that are constantly thrown at us. The ultimate expression of religiosity for a Muslim is the wearing of the hijab or the niqab. And I suppose for the convert Muslim woman who is immediately considered to have been brainwashed or oppressed, there is a constant correlation made between the veil and terrorism, which gives the Muslim woman an undertone of being a danger to society. I mean, one of my little stories is when I used to be a coach driver many years ago for National Express, and British people will know National Express, it's like the main coach company. And when 7-7 happened, 7-Eleven, that's a store, right? When 7-7 happened, I happened to be on a shift that day, and I was in a service station, Leicester Forest Services, and I was watching Sky News, and unfortunately for me, what was I carrying? A rucksack. Now, as we know, the 7-7 bombers carried rucksacks. I've never felt so uncomfortable in my entire life, even though I was wearing a National Express uniform, which, by the way, was not attractive, very nylon in every way, with a horrible tie as well, but we won't go there. You can probably find it on YouTube if you want to. Maybe don't, you might be traumatised. So, but the point is that it wasn't an outward hate, it was people walking past me and giving me looks as if this was me who had done this. This was my fault. I was a Muslim and I had a rucksack, so therefore I was by default guilty as charged. Now, in university, this translates to marginalisation of Muslim women, in particular Muslim women who are outwardly Muslim. And there is a lot of fear that we experience from people who are not Muslim, which can lead to aggressive responses. And this actually can also stem to university academia. Reports of Muslim women, particularly second language speakers, deemed to be less educated because they put a scarf on their head. They fear failing academic courses and they stay silent about the stigmatisation or hate crimes that they are experiencing. But speakers and lecturers are also not exempt. The lectures where I have gone and spoken at in different universities across the country, including the University of Sheffield, historically, where I know that 99 times out of 100, if I give a lecture that may be something to do with Islamic Awareness Week or something such related, that I maybe talk about the basic tenets of Islam and Muslims, and I know that when it comes to the question and answer, at least one person will have been planted in the audience as a provocateur to throw some hate at me. They're planted to justify media narratives of headings by terrorist groups or the marriage of IACHE to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, accusation of infiltration by Muslims taking over Europe and creating this mythical Islamic state. I'll give you one example of something that happened to me. One audience member, during a Q&A, after a talk on women in Islam, shouted out at the end, "Muhammad is a paedophile." And I was like, okay, how do you deal with that? Obviously, as a Muslim speaker and a professional, I have to be able to deal with that in an intelligent way. Well, actually, my blood is boiling right now. This insult to the human being who's the most beloved to me out of all human beings has been given the worst thing and the worst accusation that could ever be given. So instead of going crazy and knee-jerking, as sometimes we do, I responded to him. And I explained to him about his Western-centric modern lens that he was viewing life through, viewing history through, and that he was judging a whole faith through a method that was not appropriate. That in fact, at the time and context, at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and actually much later in Europe, it was very common and normal for marriages to take place at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, because people lived in a very different way. In fact, one of the British monarchs got married at 12 years old, historically. So he left with a different attitude, because he realised that what he was saying was out of context and incorrect, and that he was being hateful. I suppose what I'm trying to say here is that narrative needs to be reclaimed by black and minority groups, and as chaplains, regardless of our background, we must empower one another in order to achieve this.
I'd just like to say a personal thank you to my close colleague for stepping in at the last minute. And it was Sheikh Imam Mohammed Ismail, who has been my close colleague for many years, who is in Pakistan, so not with us, as you probably know, who first of all asked me to ask the Director General of Tel Mama, but unfortunately, again, a COVID case prevented coming. But I think that Mohammed Abu Nimir, and also the DG of Tel Mama, would be grateful that you were able to join us instead of either of them. We don't have much time now, so I'd like to ask each of you, again, just in the turn that you would like to, what is striking you or what you are noticing from the stories that have been told among you tonight?
Yeah, I think it's a thought that's just forming in my head at the moment. And in response to an experience I had earlier this week, actually, when I was interviewing on a university campus for a different project about how students can build positive relationships across different religions and worldviews, that I was told a story about a black student in a hall of residence who was very upset because they had noticed that the white students avoided being in the kitchen at the same time to cook their meals as this student. And I thought, well, you know, this isn't an overt case of hate. You know, the white students are not saying anything, you know, openly racist to the black student, but you know, nevertheless, this is still a kind of what Ameena just said, the sort of, I can't remember the term you used, but it's a kind of covert expression of hate, and just, you know, how do we tackle that? And I don't have the answer, but it made me think about that case after what you had just said, so thank you.
Thinking on my feet, I think just sharing these stories, just hearing the different experiences and feelings that we have when we resolve matters, when we work together with other people of other faiths, how black minority groups, which we are, you know, if we share the story, we actually hear similar stories of feeling marginalised or feeling fear in certain situations. When we share these stories, we sit back and say, oh, your experience is similar to mine. We look different, we have a different God, we have a different faith, but just the act of being able to share, and if we can encourage the next generation, you know, our students, essentially, that's where I'm at, to do this more and more, it can only help. It can only help that they should be quiet and listen and then share. And I think if we can model that for our students and for the people that we minister to, I think we'll be doing a good thing.
I think what I heard from all stories is something about the intentionality of wanting to be involved and to act. I think what our current moment has shown us, with the rise of nationalism and populism, rise of anti-Semitism, is that we can't just assume that the forward march of time will make us all much more progressive and better people. That's an utter myth. That actually only gets better by the intentional act of people who want to be better connected to others or want to fight for justice and fight anti-racism. That we have to stand up and make that happen. It won't just happen, and we can't just assume that actually, like, with the proliferation of social media, people become better educated, better informed. If anything, it makes us worse, it makes us more balkanised. And the ability to live in particular echo chambers has become even worse now than perhaps it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. So it requires intentionality. And that's what I'm hearing from everything that's happened, as people have said. It's not enough simply to observe what's going on, that we need to be actively involved in trying to make a change.
I think the thing that I hear is I'm just struck by the number of people that you all have mentioned, the people that you reached out to do all the things that you reached out. And I am heartened by the fact that there are people who want to have those conversations and to be doing this work together, because I agree with entirely with what Anthony said. I think we live in a moment where it is very fragile. I mean, we live in a very fragile moment. And yeah, I think especially in the US, I feel that every day. And I think the more we keep coming back to the same questions and keep doing the work, even though I don't think there's an end to it, really. Yeah.
Each one of you sitting here today have travelled from far and wide, across the world to be here. And each one of you is a diamond sitting there and is an opportunity. We must hold on to what we've got in this conference and we must make it happen. We don't want to come back in 4 years' time and having those same narratives. So each one of you diamonds need to go back to your prospective places, your respective places, but also keep the chain, keep linked to one another so that we can work together to make something even more precious.
I think we could thank all of our panellists now by thanking them with a round of applause. And I also want to say a very big thank you that so many of the people that were invited as keynote speakers to Sheffield and could physically make it have not only made it, but decided to stay with us for such a long time. And so we are very grateful, in no particular order, but to Jana and to Anthony and to Harvey, and welcome, a very warm welcome as well now to you, Kristin, as well. And thank you that you're going to spend some time with us. And so although we don't have time for question and answer now, everybody's here all evening. And to Sophie and to Ameena as well for representing your own faith or religion community and being willing to come on to what could have been a very different kind of panel or a tense panel. We're very glad for all you've contributed and helped make us understand better. So please do talk to our panellists through the evening, and remember they're all here tomorrow as well. As you probably all know, just changing mode into announcement mode, the rest of the evening is down at Halifax Hall Hotel, and at 8 o'clock we move, well before 8 o'clock we'll be gradually moving into the International Networking Marketplace. So if you were planning to set something up, do get that on the way, so it's all good to go at 8. And then our evening reflection tonight, which happens just around 9. Jay, have you got something to say about it?
I'm just wondering, are we downstairs?
Can you, no, we're going across to Halifax Hall Hotel for the rest of the evening from